Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So nice to see everybody here. The fact that we've got one of our delegates who's here on their 50th birthday is absolutely amazing. And I think that shows real dedication to the cause. So lovely to see everybody here. I do hope you're having a good week. I've been looking forward to this afternoon all week because Julian's always such an interesting speaker. So without me talking too much, because it's not me that you've paid to come and see or that you want to listen to, I'm now going to hand over to Julian to talk to us about critical media literacy versus information disorder and the school library as a third space.
Just thinking about the 50th birthday thing, I feel pretty bad about this being your experience, but I can share an anecdote which might make you feel a bit better, or it might just be fellow suffering, and it's very much a first world problem, I accept, in the context of what we're living through now. But I'm the person who was 50 in 2019 and decided that the best thing to do would be to save a bit of money and then have the big 50th birthday celebration with my partner in 2020, which obviously means nothing happened at all. So it was. Hopefully you'll have a better experience, but at least you know the situation that you're in. Critical media literacy versus information disorder, school libraries as third spaces. So I'm going to go through some kind of conceptual thinking about this from some research that I've been involved in, and then move towards suggesting some resources that might be useful and some kind of practical strategies for doing this kind of work. Because we are only together for an hour, there'll be some kind of follow-up work which I'll suggest, rather than kind of discussing it in groups throughout the presentation because of limitations of time. So we'll move through to some suggested activities, and then I'll ask you to kind of consider those in your own time. You can, if you want to, email me after the event. I'm pretty easy to find on Google. Work at Bournemouth University, and you can find my email address there, and I will reply if you have any kind of follow-up needs from the talk. Okay, so going to share some ideas here which are from 3 projects I've been involved in. One is about literacy today, which was a book called The Uses of Media Literacy, which went back to the work of Richard Hoggart from the 1950s and kind of imagined what Hoggart might see if he cast his conceptual lens over 2019, which is at the time of writing. And there's a project about third space, which I'll come to shortly, and suggest to you that you might think that a school library is a third space to an extent at least. And then there was a project that was actually funded by the US Embassy, of all people, about disinformation in particular, or fake news and media literacy, media studies as a way of kind of dealing with that. But the thing that links these together is the idea that this concept of third space applies to what happens in school libraries, and also is kind of pertinent because the international media and digital literacy community, which I'm involved in, are increasingly looking to libraries and school libraries within that group as a rich intersection for the kind of critical thinking that Richard Hoggart back in the 1950s in the UK saw as essential. So a few ideas that link together is, the idea that literacy is something that we use critically, which was Hoggart's original kind of gambit in the 50s. Media literacy, information literacy are, contemporary iterations of that process. Third space is the kind of how to frame that critical literacy work that I'm going to suggest. And then, of course, we have the issue of disinformation, which is really kind of important, particularly now, also in the wake of COVID, which is a kind of case study in the present tense that these issues kind of relate to. So to say a bit more about this intersection as I see it, you can refer to the Unesco Declaration on Media and Information Literacy, which was redrafted in 2016 in Latvia, which gives emphasis to the role of libraries. So, UNESCO have declared this an important area of kind of civic and societal concern. And then the Great School Libraries campaign, which you'll be aware of, includes the objective to deliver and teach essential information and critical literacy skills to combat fake news in gender independent learning. The Library and Information Association also including the definition of information literacy, which you can see on the screen. And then more recently, Sonia Livingston's book with Alicia Bloom-Ross, which is a book I would really recommend. And there's also lots of online resources at the LSC website related to the book, which are open access for free. Was a piece of ethnography with parents, and one of the conclusions of that piece of really important research was that digital dilemmas act as a lightning rod for contemporary contestations over values, identity and responsibilities. So if we think about the investments that we have as educators, library professionals, academics, but also the investments of students, and now particularly in the COVID era, you know, the investments emotionally and in terms of supporting education by parents, all of these things are bound up with a kind of complex intersection of anxieties and concerns as well. One of the important things coming out of Livingston and Bloom-Ross's book is that people tend to project onto technology the concerns they have about other things in their lives, and you know, as many of you will know, being a parent is a emotive and challenging role, particularly now with lockdowns. And so that book's really interesting in terms of how some of the assumptions we make about generational distinctions with technology are not really valid. It's much more complicated than we might have thought. So all of these things come together in this intersection where work in the school library could be of great importance. Some people use the term fake news. Some people use the term misinformation, disinformation. And it's interesting, actually, if you look back, you know, you have to be slightly careful, because disinformation, I understand, was a term first used by Stalin. And of course, you know, that Donald Trump was one of the key kind of proponents of the term fake news, because he used that term to discredit any kind of journalistic or media activity that wasn't to his liking. So those terms are all laden, and the term I prefer to use, which is the one I've used in the title of this talk, is information disorder. And that was conceptualized by Wardle and Derrickson for a Council of Europe report in 2017, and it consists of this kind of perfect storm of various things coming together. This was pre-COVID, it was post-Trump, post-Brexit, but pre-COVID. And I think if we look at COVID as an extension of this now, we can see how COVID might have kind of amplified these issues, just as it's exacerbated lots of other issues that we were facing already. But it consists of 5 things working together, which are a state of confusion, cynicism, fragmentation, irresponsibility, and apathy. And one thing that struck me during the US Embassy project was I went to Moscow for a workshop that I was running for the research, and I spoke to teachers and academics in Moscow, and they described, you know, what used to be a distinction between, you know, the UK, for example, and Russia, where they would say, you know, this thing in Russia about nothing is true and everything is possible, is there's a kind of lack of trust, but also a kind of acceptance of that lack of trust, and a state of kind of constant confusion about truth, where you kind of pick the version of truth that you prefer, that goes with your worldview or aligns with what you're frustrated about or angry about, etc. And I remember thinking at the time that felt like it was changing, and that we weren't as different to that in the UK as we might have been before. And in my mind at that point was Brexit. But of course now with COVID, you know, it would be hard, I think, to argue against this idea that we're in a state of information disorder. So to put it together as a kind of equation, I suppose, it's technology plus networks plus austerity plus polarization plus data plus surveillance plus capitalism plus COVID. And when I say capitalism, I'm not making some kind of left-wing political point only. It's that, you know, there is a business model for information disorder. The large technical, you know, multinational corporations, Silicon Valley, capitalists and so on, they are being held to account more, and they are saying all the right things about regulation, but there is no doubt that fake news is part of their business model, or at least fake news and clickbait and those kinds of things support their business model. So capitalism does have to be factored in as an aspect of this, but of course then, as I've just been mentioning Russia as a case study, it's not the only model or framework that creates a problem. in this environment. So if we want to think about critical literacy as an ongoing concern, perhaps increasingly important all the time now, this notion of kind of taking back control of your mindset, which is itself, of course, a play on a particular slogan, which may have been considered by some to be a slogan of misinformation. I like to remind people of the work of Stuart Hall and the Centre for Contemporary Cultural Studies, back in the 60s to 80s, really, and to say that these concerns are not new. And I want to, at this point, show you a video which describes the work of that centre. And I'm going to do that by exiting the slides. This should work. I'm going to my queued up video, because that should work better, but I will need to check before I play that you're seeing it. So I'm hoping you're now seeing a Stuart Hall graphic, and when I press play you'll see the video. Let me know if not.
Yes, we are.
We live saturated with media. We see our reality through them, but these are not transparent operations. They involve the workings of power. Stuart Hall was an outsider, born in colonial Jamaica, educated in Oxford. He was out of place in both. He left academia, the literary canon, high culture, to become an intellectual of mass culture. What he did was controversial. He was looking at the power of mainstream media in representing race, gender, class, ethnicity, religion. Hall said those discourses are not innocent, that hidden in mass media is ideology. The media theory's job is to find the ideology, expose it, critique it. The media's racialization of crime, the patriarchal narratives on gender, the othering of immigrants, Muslims, the poor. The media are active agents in this process. But what of the masses? The audience is watching. Hall broke with the presumption that the masses are dumb, passive. In fact, he questioned who the faceless masses even are. Some may accept the dominant meanings embedded in the media. Some may negotiate them. Others outright reject them. Where other media theorists argue that messages are imposed on people from above, Hall said power is not as simple as that. He saw pockets of resistance that undermine dominant media narratives. Think of the bloggers in Tunisia, the graffiti artists of Brazil. Black Lives Matter. But Hall went further. He also told us to seek out stories elsewhere, in the lowly, despised spaces of knowledge. The gossip mags, the soap opera, the music videos. If you want to understand society, then maybe avoid the news. Those formalised spaces that house official discourse. Find different stories, different perspectives, different realities.
Okay, bear with me while I get back to my slides. Okay, so hopefully now you're seeing the critical literacy slide again. Again, shout if you're not, because I'm only seeing my own slides at this point. So what if you can hold that thought about different realities, because it's going to be important in a minute. So if we think about what media literacy is, or critical media literacy. You know, it's not really about skills and competencies and being able to kind of use technology in particular ways. It's about a critical mindset about the information environment. And one of the things I've passionately argued is that rather than have you know, a range of kind of quick fix reactive resources for dealing with misinformation, and that what we need is a sustained educational program in schools where students are equipped with a critical mindset for all information, and through that you get a kind of communicative resilience that's more like teaching somebody to fish than, you know, giving them a fish, if you like. But the important part of the end of that video about being respectful and interested in alternative realities, of course, now comes into collision with another issue, which is around this threat to democracy that we might see in arguably people having too much of a sense of a decentered, fragmented, kind of pluralist idea about reality. So there's an argument emerging that we have either too little democracy in terms of our engagement in civic sphere, which would concern Richard Hoggart, if you look at the quote there at the top right of the screen. But there's another argument that we have too much democracy because we have this kind of erosion of trust in experts. So, you know, so what if it's against scientific advice? It's my reality, my truth. Now I'm going to go with that. Don't tell me, you know, what to think as from your vantage point of an expert. So we have to kind of factor in this notion when we think about information disorder, that, you know, it might not be that people are not critical enough. It might be that they're so critical that they are, you know, capable of creating their own version of reality, which might be a risk. And with that in mind, you know, a lot of people at the moment are very concerned about conspiracy theory, you know, and the development of movements like QAnon in the United States. And what's interesting about that is that kind of academically and theoretically, there's now a tension between the quote at the top of the screen, recent quote from Barack Obama. He talked about the importance of being able to hold two ideas in your head at the same time for leadership. But he also, you know, was asked about truth, and he said, well, truth is the truth. Some people just think it's in their interest to lie about it, but he wants to reinstate this notion of there being a truth for things to be judged against. Of course, very different to Donald Trump. But if you think about some of the more progressive kind of academic ideas that are at work in notions about critical literacy, then as you can see from Phil Barber's quote at the bottom of the screen, he's one of my PhD students, you know, countercultural narratives which were once the preserve of the radical and progressive left have become a characteristic of an extreme and paranoid neoconservative alt-right. Now, Jean-Francois Leotard, who was a philosopher of postmodernism back in the 60s, he wrote a book called Le Différend, and in it he talks about the importance of being able to acknowledge what he called competing language games. So he said, rather than have a sense of universal truth, we need a philosophical approach which is respectful of the differences between people's versions of reality. And he called those différends. And he, in his book, uses this example of a film by Herzog called Where the Green Ants Dream, which is based on a true story about an Australian mining company wanting to mine onto the land which was inhabited by Aborigines. I'm going to show you the trailer from the film and explain why I think it's interesting at this point. So again, let me come out and into the trailer. So hopefully now you're seeing Where the Green Ants Dream full screen, and I will play the trailer.
We're going to be blasting again soon. You got to move. Boom, boom, quick, quick, understand?
This is the place where the green ants dream.
Ants! Green ants! Dreaming here!
Well, it's not visible, but there's nowhere else in Australia where the Earth's magnetic field is so abnormally distorted.
And you've measured that?
Yes, yes, of course. And because the green ant is the only living creature on Earth with a sensory organ attuned to magnetic fields, like a small green living compass.
tell me, what is the 12 Act? Because we have been here for 40,000 years, longer than you came.
Well, that's an option we've not considered, naturally. But you must absolutely understand that we will take legal steps.
Here, you talk about progress over and over again. And where does it lead the Aborigine? It is progress into nothingness.
Order. This court is not a forum for political oratory.
Está colocado Pasarela. Va llevando la pelota a Pasarela. Ataca Pasarela. Va Holguín entrando. Pelota para Kempe. Busca el área. Se va llevando la pelota. Se metió en el área penal. Sigue avanzando. Recta, corta, defensor. Carga Bertoni. Va a sacar el tiro bajo. Hay un rebote. ¡Zurda! Y el arquero. ¡Cuánto corner para Argentina!
Okay. Back to the slides. So that's interesting to me because when I was studying critical theory back in the day, this was an example used by Leotard of a kind of progressive respect for the other, ethnographic view, if you like, of truth and reality. And the kind of moral compass of that film is that the mining company are wrong to want to mine on the land where the Aborigines believe the green ants are dreaming, because they believe that the dreaming of the green ants keeps the world turning, and that if you stop the green ants from dreaming, the world will end. And we might think that that's probably not true, but the whole point of that kind of academic work in the 60s in the name of kind of postmodernism was to say, well, whose truth is sovereign, whose truth is superior to who else's truth. But if you think about the beliefs of QAnon and some of the more recent kind of concerns about people's reactions to COVID and anti-vaxxers and the whole worry about 5G, there's a sense of trying to have it both ways. If you then say, well, these people are clearly wrong and their reality is clearly dangerous. So when we think about critical literacy, and we then think about critical literacy around media and information, what we have to do is to enable a critical mindset to be a negotiated kind of critical mindset rather than the imposition of one position onto another, and that's quite difficult to do. But let me move forward into how we can do that. So I've been talking really so far about the what of media literacy, and there are lots of models for this. You can find whichever one you prefer. There's models from Unesco, which I mentioned before, European Union, models coming out of the UK, North America, and a composite, if you like, of those models is the 5 areas I've put onto the screen on the outside there. So it's about people's access to media, it's about their ability to analyze media, create their own media, reflect on that creation, and then to develop a kind of agency. And that last one's really important because there's an increasing interest in civic media literacies, which are more values orientated. So this is what I referred to at the start of the presentation, the uses of literacy. And that agency part is about what you actually do with your literacy to hopefully make the world a better place. But all of this is about a mindset and a propensity for action for good. And it's very different to the idea of reacting to a problem with a quick fix solution. So the Douglas Rushkoff quote, which is from a great book, I think, by him called Team Human, says this: what about looking at the vitality of the patient instead? So rather than coming up with a new algorithm to filter dangerous weaponized memes from my teen's Instagram account, What about if I just make my team and our culture more resilient to this? So I'm trying to promote our humanity, so we're less vulnerable to the insanity rather than looking at the insanity as the problem to be fixed. And there is a really obvious analogy to make now, which is, you know, linking back again to COVID, which is, you know, this is about vaccine rather than antibiotics. So the quick fix would be, you know, you try and solve disinformation through, you know, a cure to the disease which has already taken hold. And then the more sustained critical mindset educational program I'm advocating for, you know, is more like a vaccination that gives people longer term resilience and protection. But now we need to move to the, sorry, just to say, I've put the, I'm moving my mouse, you can see. So these are the kinds of objectives, and in the middle is my hypothesis for where we do that, which is by creating this thing called a third space. Third space is not my term, but the projects I've been involved in are ones which apply the concept into this field in an original way. Third space comes from work by people like Barber and Gutierrez from the kind of literacy theory world. So in a world where we used to be able to go outside and we weren't all stuck in our houses, the way of thinking about this normally would be that the first space is where you live. So that's, you know, your home, your community, your kind of personal spaces. And the second space is where you work or study. So it's a formal institution where you go to be involved in the process of learning. And the third space is a space which is either physical or metaphorical or digital or virtual, any kind of space where there can be a meaningful exchange between knowledge and expertise from the first and second. So if you simply create an activity in school which is a bit different to normal, that has no relationship with the school curriculum, we wouldn't count that as a third space. It has to be a way of working which brings in the kind of repertoires of literacy, funds of knowledge, expertise that students already have in the first space from their life experience, but it actually makes a connection with the school curriculum, with the second space. And then things flow backwards and forwards between the two spaces. And a library, or a school library in particular, clearly has the potential to be that third space if it's facilitated, you know, in the right way. And I use that term like porous membrane, which means things are flowing backwards and forwards meaningfully between the two spaces. I will pause at this moment just to say the longer this goes on in terms of lockdown and learning at home, the more difficult it becomes to distinguish between first space and second. And I don't think anyone's yet decided how, you know, what this means for this notion of third space, because we're either all in the second space or we're all in the first space, or there's no third space anymore. We haven't quite worked out how it's going to work. So this metaphor, this spatial arrangement depends, you know, on that pre-COVID distinction between where you live and where you go to learn. And what happens in third spaces is that education becomes more agentive, and these systems promote the negotiation with outside culture, and they recognise that students bring with them knowledge, skills and dispositions. And if you're thinking about that in terms of disinformation, media, critical literacy around media and information, it's simply about recognising that by virtue of being younger and on screens for longer and being more immersed probably in social media than their teachers, you know, young people as students do bring with them expertise through immersion and engagement. What teachers and information professionals in libraries have are expertise, you know, expertise domains in critical thinking, academic thinking, that kind of scaffolding of life experience in an educational environment. So you exchange those two things. It's not to say that students are experts on media and we're not. It's to say that there are expertises on both sides that could come together in the third space. And in terms of learning theory, these carry with them principles from Vygotsky about, you know, proximal development and scaffolded learning in that context as well. So what does the third space help with? It helps with a more dynamic approach to literacy, where literacy is constantly changing, it's negotiated, it's socio-material, which means to be literate now you have to be able to function across spoken, print, written, and also technological literacy, but it also involves aptitude with objects and machines, as well as with words and sounds. And we argue in another project, myself with John Potter at UCL, that we should take more seriously the act of curation. And that's about how, particularly in social media environments, lots of people are constantly sharing and curating and presenting a kind of performance of self to digital media. So it's more than just an extra thing, it's an actual literacy practice. So third space can help to be a place where curation is recognized and literacy is understood as more dynamic. And crucially for my work, really, it's about saying to policymakers, this is how you get a more resilient citizenry through a more dynamic, agentive kind of idea of curriculum. So rather than have a static idea of literacy, which you either have or you don't, a deficit model where there are skills and competencies that are static and can be measured, we need an approach to literacy which is more fluid and dynamic and changes more as new issues come into the environment, such as propaganda, hate speech, disinformation, fake news, and cyberbullying. So agentive people are less vulnerable. They become agentive through working in third spaces with a more dynamic idea about what literacy can be. Now, without wanting to put a dampener on this, this is, I think, a million miles away from current UK government educational policy, but it doesn't make it wrong. So to give you some examples to kind of finish with before we get into something of a discussion, and to bring it back down perhaps to a more kind of applicable level in some respects, our project for the US Embassy, Media Literacy versus Fake News, Critical Thinking, Resilience and Civic Engagement, led to the production of a set of resources, which I'll show you in a second. So I'll walk you through the website. But we produced a kind of top 10 list of multi-stakeholder media literacy resources. So these were resources which were given positive evaluations by journalists, students, teachers, media professionals, we may call, creatives as well. So, and librarians. A bit of a faux pas to come to this group last with this audience, but also librarians. And Alison Tarrant from SLA was one of the people we engaged with for that part of this piece of research. So these top 10 resources are not just resources that were seen as being really useful for journalists or teachers, but for all the groups, and I'll show you those in a second. And we concluded our research, again, by going back to this metaphor of, give a person a fish, they'll eat for a day, or teach them to fish, they'll eat for life. That idea that really we wanted to distinguish between good resources that give you that kind of quick fix response to this information. For example, fact checking, image verification tools, those kinds of things. And then things where we can integrate resources in more depth for a more sustained kind of educational model over a period of time. For me, biased though I undoubtedly am, given my background, that to a large extent would just be media studies. If you made media studies mandatory in the school curriculum, you'd fix some of the problems. And it's always surprising to me that I go to activities with kind of policymakers and government people, and they say, if only there was something in schools we could do, to help with this issue of a lack of kind of literacy around media. When I say media studies, I'm not sure we want it to be that, because there's so much negativity around that subject in policy circles. And then there are some specific examples which, if we had more time, we might look at and feedback on today in the session. But what I'm going to do now is just walk you through them, and then we'll have a conversation when I've finished doing that. So if I can move through out of my slides and back to my browser, I'm going to show you, first of all, the website for our project. So this is our project, and you can see there's a field review. This is all open access. What we did here was we just scanned this kind of systematic review of everything that's been done on, at the time, kind of fake news and media literacy. So the idea there is that you know, other people don't have to do all that background work. It's just like a at a glance kind of set of links to what we consider to be important work in the field. Then we held our workshop, which was in London at Olympic Park, and you can see here all the presentations, but also what we've done here is chunked, you know, particular kind of comments by particular speakers on particular aspects of what we were talking about. And then the result of the workshop with journalists, students, teachers, media professionals, and librarians was this toolkit. So we have some resources that we think are useful, and we're ranked as useful by these groups. A top 10. In my mind, when I was talking to our designer, this was supposed to be a bit like TripAdvisor. I think that's just in the end more in my head than visible on the screen, but it's like supposed to be like a TripAdvisor kind of rating function. As you can see, lots of different kinds of examples. That's Team Human that I referenced earlier. That's the website for Douglas Rushkoff's project. And then lower down, outside of the top 10, we've put all our project presentations here, but we also linked to all the other resources which people thought were useful. They didn't make it into the top 10, but they were useful according to particular participants in our workshop. So that's the first thing I want to show you. And now to show you some of the specific examples that I've mentioned as being, I think, particularly useful. This is actually a video about an exhibition. So it's the quickest way of conveying to you the information. I'm just going to show you a few minutes of the video, but what you need to do is watch the video and then actually access the classroom itself if you think it looks useful.
Make sure it sounds right, boy.
Hello everyone, my name is Riccardo Castellini. I'm a media educator and I'm here today to guide you through an extraordinary online exhibition put together by Tactical Tech, an international NGO that engages with citizens and civil society organizations to explore how the digital technologies impact the societies where we live and also individual autonomy. The title of this exhibition is The Glass Room, Disinformation Edition, and it aims to explore how the internet and the digital technologies have changed our relationship with information, the way we read it and react to it. It is important to say that this material does not replace the full experience of going online and visiting the exhibition yourselves. Actually, I hope you guys use this video as a first guide to the exhibition and then take some time to visit online and enjoy the many different resources available there.
Okay, it's a 50-minute video and I just wanted to give the introduction, but now I want to, if I can, move along a bit to show you a couple of examples of what is in there.
Choosing a steady video with a consistent background will give you a better result. Record a data set for the face you want to place the source, matching the lighting and expressions as much as possible to the target video. Cover the faces of other people in the target video, otherwise they will be picked up by the algorithm and confuse the training process. The algorithm will crop the faces so it can use them for training and save their position to accurately overlay the mask afterwards. The algorithm generates a mask of the face from the source video, which you then need to align onto the target video. Video editing software will allow you to blend in the mask better and refine the final result.
So that's giving people the opportunity to experience the production of deepfake, and it goes with one of the key principles of what I'm talking about in terms of kind of third space and media literacy work, that you learn better by having the experience of doing the thing that you need to understand critically. But also, you know, we will have students that have had experiences that they can bring in, but what they need is a more kind of critical mindset about those experiences, which is what I mean by that third space exchange. One more example from here. This is about data privacy and profiling.
The third topic you can see here in this video is called Personal Data, Political Persuasion, Inside the Influence Industry. What's for sale?
We win the tough fights. We help you answer the big questions. We power democracy.
And the big question is, and by now we know the answer.
Okay, so let's move out of that one. There's lots there, and as the video says, and as I've said, you know, you can look at the video and then you can actually go into the resources themselves, which are online. And one of the key things to say at this point is that one of the perhaps obvious findings from my research in this area has been that it's one thing to explain to people, particularly young citizens, that something's fake or that somebody's privacy is being used for a purpose that perhaps wasn't clear, or that, you know, perhaps Brexit was the outcome of a very, very sophisticated campaign which involved the harvesting of data in a way that, you know, we've never seen before in a political campaign. But it's another thing to make people care about that. And one of the more disturbing findings in my research has tended to be that if people like the argument or like the version of truth or even like the lie, you know, they don't necessarily care about its authenticity or validity. So you certainly need more than, you know, an approach which verifies. You need an approach which is about a critical mindset and actually caring about truth and kind of caring about motivations for the use of information. And with that in mind, this website, Mind Over Media, is, I think, great and really interesting. It comes from the work of Rene Hobbs in the US and also from some Croatian media literacy research as well. And it's an interactive site. So what happens here is that you can look at examples that people have shared that they believe to be propaganda, and then you can upload your own example. So you can have students do this. What's important to say at this point is that Mind Over Media doesn't distinguish propaganda from fake news, misinformation, conspiracy, or professional media. So when we used this website with journalists at the workshop, you know, some of them were very upset because it included a Time magazine cover. You know, and journalists were like, look, this is not propaganda. But the argument of Mind Over Media is that all persuasive information is propaganda. And I would take you back to the video about Stuart Hall. You know, that idea that, you know, all news is selective and constructive and ideological. We should have a critical mindset and a healthy cynicism about all information, all media, all news, rather than distinguishing between kind of real and fake or professional or amateur or any of those things. And then finally, and I'm not finally, there's two more. Have I got them all up here? One is Newswise. I haven't got that up here. Newswise is perhaps the most straightforward in the sense that it is produced by The Guardian, and it's a website that helps young people, you know, distinguish between professional news and fake news. It's a really nice resource, and it's designed specifically for that kind of purpose. But the last one I want to share with you is a project that we were involved in where I work, which is specifically around data literacy and COVID. And this is a web comic. It takes you through various kind of activities and examples, but it's about data visualization. And if you think about our reactions to the pandemic and to the changing situation every single day, I think this is a really good example of how now data is in the public domain, particularly kind of around public health, rules, behavior, what we're allowed to do, what the future holds. I wouldn't go as far as to say there was a different category called data literacy, but I would say that a critical understanding of the way that data can be represented in different ways is now as important as understanding how different news articles can represent the same reality in different ways, or how different kind of Facebook posts and campaigns and social media threads can also distort or represent news in different ways. So this is a really nice resource, I think, for getting people introduced to the idea of being literate about data and understanding that data visualization is a particularly kind of important area now for people to have an understanding of, and again, a critical mindset over as well. So I think now I'm going to check my slides. Yeah, the Newswise link is there. You'll get these slides after I finish talking, and you can click on these links. And Newswise is the one I didn't show you there, but it's there. So my conclusion, I think we may have the author of one of these texts in this call, which is great. But my conclusion is to ask you to, in your own time, have a look through these resources and others. If you look at our website, there's lots more, and plug my own book. If you read my book, Fake News and Media Studies, there's about 25 more recommended resources in there as well. And the question would be, how can these resources be used in the school library? How would you be able to work with subject teachers to kind of integrate the use of these resources into the kind of curriculum work they're doing? How can they help facilitate third space learning? So what would be exchanged? What would the students bring in to the experience from their own life world media engagements to kind of match up with your information literacy expertise and that of the teachers if you're working in partnership? And then, of course, think about other possibilities or better ideas for this kind of work in the specific context that you are in. That concludes the presentation. So I'm going to escape, close everything down, and stop sharing my screen if I can. Let me find. So I've got two screens here, and I've got the bit where I stop share my screen share on the other. There we go.
It's okay, Julian. I've taken your screen down.
Yeah. Sorry, it was too far for me to do that. So you're just seeing me now? Yep,
that's right.
Cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we've got, I think, 10 minutes left, which was about the plan for any discussion.
Oh, okay, right. So question comes straight away from Sally Dring, who's asking if we were going to deliver a session for our students' parents, where would we start? And I think that's a very good point, because you've got to go for the parents first, haven't you?
We have, I think. So first of all, I'm going to plug this again, and I can plug it because it's not by me. But also, again, to say, look it up online. There's loads of free resources on the LS, London School of Economics website. So I think what you would need to do to be faithful to the kind of third space idea is to have a kind of negotiated agenda for that. So one thing might just be to say, we're going to have a session, a workshop, where we talk to parents about their concerns. But what you would want to do is match up, or converge their concerns more generally about, at the moment, being a parent in this kind of hyper technological environment that we're kind of working through. Maybe it's about the homeschooling element, maybe it's not, depending on when you do this and what the situation is. What are their concerns? Some of the ideas I've shared today about, the quicker fix resources, where you can actually say, okay, here are some resources you could work through at home with your kids. some of those resources that parents can look at for themselves, particularly things like the data literacy stuff, that would then maybe put them in a position where they can talk to their kids about data in a more informed kind of way. But there are going to be other opportunities for linking more to curriculum. So I've done quite a lot of work with the UKLA, where I've worked with classroom teachers, and they've said, okay, you're doing stuff in history which is around the changing nature of the welfare state. Well, what about looking at the way media represents the welfare state in particular ways? Going back a little bit, but you may remember programs like Benefit Street, which were seen to play quite a big role in mobilising negative ideas about benefits, and then we would use that juxtaposed with Ken Loach's film, around food banks and the use of those, which gives a very different view of all that stuff. So you start to say, well, you look at something like the benefit system, you can see how media plays a role in representing that, and that makes a difference to the way we think about it in life. But that would be done in connection with the history GCSE curriculum. So it depends what it is. But if parents can see that the value is, threefold. One, it's about, how do I support my kid better in this kind of literacy environment, in critical media literacy environment. Secondly, how do I know what they should be doing for school when they're working online at home better? And thirdly, how can this kind of work on media literacy also link back to the curriculum? Then you've got those kind of intersections between things which are quite healthy. But I would say, sorry, rambling answer, but start with what the parents think they need, and then kind of converge that with the kind of ideas that I've suggested.
I think also, I mean, as you've just said, start with what the parents think they need, but I'd also start with think with what the parents think they know, because that's another thing, isn't it? We all think we're very conversant with social media and everything else now, but with most parents, we've only scratched the surface.
Yeah, we have, and as I said before, and again, this is not my work; it's the work of Livingston and Blum Ross. But that projection bit about it. Often when we're talking about technology and kids and school, we're really talking about anxieties about education more generally. Yeah. How do we best support our kids in a really competitive educational environment? But technology becomes a kind of manifestation of that, because it's so sudden and immediate and kind of panic inducing. But you often end up realizing that actually what you're worried about is something to do with the curriculum, or what does, particularly when the kids are learning online at home, what does a lesson look like? Should they be doing it in real time? What's how much work should they be doing independently? All those kinds of issues that aren't really about the tech. They're about understanding what the social practices of education are about.
We've got another question in from Lauren Chatley, who comments that this would feed well into a student session on confirmation bias. And are there any resources that you know of out there that librarians could use in these? For example, worksheets or videos for younger ages, etc.
Yeah, so I haven't got the chat in front of me. If the person that's asked the question emails me directly, I'll do a little bit of work early next week. I'm pretty snowed under this week, because I think the answer is that some of the resources that I've already suggested will have material on confirmation bias. Certainly Mindover Media does. And there's also some really interesting writing by David Buckingham, who's quite a kind of prominent name in my field, about how confirmation bias is just a thing that's always there, and we actually live our lives confirming our biases. It's not some kind of new thing that's happened with like fake news and everything else. But in response to the specific question for younger age groups, I would have to drill down, have a look, because my work is normally with teenagers rather than younger kids. So if you send me an email, I'll have a look and then send you some links.
Are you happy for me to put your email in the chat box there, Julian?
Yeah, absolutely. It's jmcdougall@bournemouth.ac.uk.
I'll just type that in for everyone.
And one of the things, just while you're doing that, is there is a question about whether you can do much about confirmation bias in the sense that it might just be about supporting young people in understanding how we all confirm our biases rather than trying to kind of change it, because there's an argument that it's a inevitable part of the human condition. You know, certainly I can tell you now that even in my house, there's confirmation bias going on every day about, you know, our different reactions to rules and what should be happening around COVID and everything else. And, you know, we could all watch the same news feature, and all three of us in the house at the moment, my daughter's away, will go, yeah, because this proves my argument. No, it proves my argument. And understanding that as a kind of literacy practice is quite useful, rather than trying to unnecessarily stop it.
We've all got another question coming from Karen B, who's asked, are there any resources that you know of that we could use to do a lesson on this for EPQ study?
Could you just remind me of the acronym?
Do you know what? I could, but it's just got straight out of my head. Apologies, everybody. Can somebody put it in the chat box? Thank you. Extended project qualification. Knew what it was, but couldn't think what the words were.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I would have to know more about EPQ to give you a better answer.
I would think, Karen, just from my own knowledge, you'd probably find there's some resources that you can use on the Fossil website. If you've been on there and had a look, they've certainly got some really good resources on there that I would think you'd be able to use for the EPQ.
I remember seeing that on Twitter, actually, and there was something specific to misinformation from that group. So yeah. I mean, I think that would be something you could easily find. Sorry for not having a better answer to that one. No,
that's absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. We don't expect you to know absolutely everything, Julian, although you do seem to, pretty much.
I've got about 3 ideas, and I just recycle them in various ways, so it sounds better than it is.
Far too self-depreciating you are. You definitely are. Okay, Karen, I'll put the website I was just talking about in the chat box for you in just a moment. But we are just about at the end of our time today. So just before we finish, naturally, I'd like to say thank you very much for Julian for a very thought-provoking and interesting session. There's certainly a lot to take away from that and to think about. We will definitely be sending you out the presentation in the next few days, along with the recording as well. So if you do want to watch it again, you will be able to access it on the SLA YouTube channel. So you'll be able to watch it again. But just before we finish, just a reminder that next week's webinar, we do have a webinar next Wednesday, and that is being run by Alison. And it's about reading for pleasure. So one that I would suggest not to miss. So do have a look at the events page on the website where you'll find details of that one. And then 2 weeks after that, we've got our Meet the Creator evening, which is going to be amazing. We've got some really good creators on that next time. And you will probably notice if you come along that I'll be being very fangirl, just for a change, just for a change. We've got some great authors on there. So again, thank you very much, Julian. That was amazing, absolutely fab, and very nice to see everybody in the chat box as well taking part. Do all have a great weekend when it comes along, and a restful half term, although I must admit half terms seem kind of run into the other days now, don't they? Very much so, but let's hope we've all got the chance to switch off a bit next week.
Thanks. Can I just quickly say as well, if anyone wants to get in touch, please do, because I should have said this earlier, but I'm involved in the SLA as a patron now, and one of the reasons for that is that in doing this work, you know, I'll be honest, I got more. I mean, it should have been obvious anyway, but the kind of the importance of school libraries kind of came more into my radar for this kind of work than it had been before. So it's a two-way thing. I'm really interested to learn more from school librarians, and if anyone wants to get in touch and, you know, opportunity to collaborate on anything, you know, through the SLA, that would be great.
I'm sure you'll definitely be taken up on that one, Julian. You'll regret that. Absolutely wonderful. And as Sue says, we've got our chair actually in the room as well, and Sue's just commented that we are very grateful for your patronage, which of course we are, definitely. And you're never going to be able to escape now. You do know that. You know, that's it. You're with us now. Thank you very much, everybody. See you next time, hopefully. Bye.